Have you ever loved someone, but weren't sure if they chose you or just needed you? Now imagine being a woman who spent her life cleaning hotel rooms, only to wake up one morning, married to a billionaire in a mansion where no one speaks to you like you belong. Not his family, not his staff, not even him. Claire Whitman didn't marry for love. She signed the papers because it offered stability, something she'd never had. But what happens when stability comes with silence, when kindness feels rehearsed, and when the man you married still dines alone? Would you stay and disappear slowly in the shadows of his world? Or would you walk away from wealth, from comfort, from the last chance you thought you had? This is a story about the vows we never say out loud, and the kind of love that begins after the wedding. If you've ever questioned your worth, or stayed quiet when you should have spoken, this story might feel like yours too. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, and join us on a journey that might just change how you see love, choice, and yourself. Let's begin. It was a Tuesday when Thomas Everhart learned he had to get married. The kind of Tuesday where the sun was shining too brightly for the kind of news he was about to receive. He stood alone in his late father's study at Everhart Estate, oak-paneled walls, brass globes, shelves lined with books no one had touched since the Carter administration. The letter lay open on the antique desk, his father's signature curved at the bottom, with one final command that read more like a warning: to retain your controlling shares in Everhart International. You must be legally wed within 60 days of my passing. The name of the bride is to be of your choosing. But choose. You must. No explanations. No room for appeal. Just an ultimatum wrapped in familial expectation. Thomas, 45, a man known for his discipline and silence, read the line 3 times. His hand, firm even in market crashes and courtroom crossfires, trembled for the first time in years. Marriage wasn't something he feared, it was something he no longer believed in. He had been married once, a long time ago. That story didn't end with betrayal or scandal. It ended in a hospital room with a quiet beep and the unbearable stillness of a hand going cold in his. After that, Thomas had closed a door inside himself, one he never intended to open again. But this was business. His lawyer, Charles Greer, cleared his throat politely from across the room. You don't have to love her, Charles said carefully. You just have to marry her. Thomas didn't respond. His gaze was fixed out the window, where the groundskeepers trimmed the roses. His late father loved roses and legacy. Do we know anyone discreet? He asked finally, his voice like gravel under weight. Someone who won't ask for more than the contract offers. Charles hesitated. There is someone, he said. You may not remember her. Claire Whitman. She used to work at the Mariner Bay Resort, your family's property in Maine. Back of house. Logistics. She left 3 years ago. Thomas's brow furrowed. The name was faint, like a melody heard in passing. She's quiet, not interested in publicity. Currently teaches part-time at a community center in Charleston. Single. No affiliations, no baggage, clean record. She'd agree, Thomas asked. She might. For the right reason. Thomas closed the letter again. His father's words echoed louder than the creaking wood underfoot. 2 days later, Claire stood at the gates of Everhart Estate, holding a canvas tote bag and a quiet storm behind her eyes. She hadn't worn makeup. She hadn't worn heels. She looked like someone who had long stopped trying to be noticed. Thomas met her in the study. Same room, same chair. He stood when she walked in, not out of etiquette, but because something in her presence made sitting feel inappropriate. "Claire," he said. "Mr. Everhart," she replied, her voice smooth but restrained, like she was used to being careful with her words. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't, not right away. She looked around the room instead, as if absorbing its weight. "I know this isn't how it's supposed to be," he said finally, "but I need a wife. You need financial stability. And maybe we both need something we're not ready to say out loud." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then finally sat down. "I'm not good at pretending," she said simply. "I'm not asking you to pretend," Thomas said. "Just stand beside me when needed. Publicly, for appearances. You'll be compensated generously. And you can leave after 6 months. No obligations." Claire nodded slowly. "Why me?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He considered saying something strategic, something careful, but the truth slipped out before he could stop it. "Because you don't look like someone who wants to be saved." Claire's expression flickered just slightly, but enough for him to notice. After a pause, she nodded again. "I'll need time to think." Of course. But the very next morning, he received a handwritten note on cream paper tucked under his study door. "I'll do it. But I won't disappear. I've done that for too long. Claire." The wedding was scheduled for the third Saturday in April. No press. No family beyond a cousin who owed Thomas a favor, and a florist who'd once done Martha Stewart's guest house. Claire wore a dress the housekeeper picked out. It wasn't white. Not quite. More like the color of almond milk left in the sun. She didn't walk down the aisle. She entered from the side. Quiet and unsmiling. Thomas wore a navy suit, pressed sharp as always. He didn't look at her during the ceremony, and she didn't expect him to. The officiant was brief. The vows were legal, not lyrical. There was no kiss, just a handshake after the certificate was signed. Later that evening, the two sat across from each other at a long dining table in the east wing. It could have seated 24. There were only 2 plates. Claire poked at her roasted asparagus. Thomas sipped bourbon and didn't eat. Silence stretched. Not awkward, just wide. Claire finally broke it. "Did you ever imagine your wedding would look like this?" Thomas glanced at her. "No." "You regret it?" He paused. "Not yet." She nodded. "That's fair." Another silence. This one heavier. "I was married before," he said quietly, surprising even himself. Claire didn't look up, but her fingers stilled on the fork. "She passed away." Claire whispered. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." There was no more talk after that. But something shifted. Not in the room, not between them, but within each of them. A quiet nudge against the wall they had both spent years building. The morning after the wedding felt no different than any other. The sky over Charleston was overcast, with low clouds crawling lazily above the Everhart estate. From the tall bedroom window, Claire watched the gray hues stretch across the marshlands. A few drops of rain touched the glass, but disappeared quickly, as if too shy to stay. She didn't expect a honeymoon. There was none scheduled, none spoken of. Instead, there was a room hers now, supposedly with high ceilings and linens so white they almost hurt the eyes. A single suitcase sat near the dresser, the same one she had packed herself 3 days earlier, with 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of cotton tops, and a worn paperback she refused to leave behind. She hadn't unpacked, not because she didn't plan to stay, but because she didn't know what staying meant in a house like this. By 9 a.m., she made her way downstairs. The estate was large enough to get lost in, Wide halls echoed with footsteps even when there was no one around. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and the rosemary the groundskeeper used in the front hedges. In the kitchen, Margaret, the housekeeper, was slicing strawberries with precise, elegant movements. She looked up briefly. "Morning, Mrs. Everhart." Claire blinked. She hadn't heard that name yet. It hung in the air, unfamiliar. "Claire is fine," she said gently. Margaret nodded but didn't change her wording. "Coffee, yes. Please?" The two women sat in silence for a while. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting it steady her. Her mind drifted not backward, but sideways, to a different kitchen, one with cracked tiles, louder laughter, and the smell of burnt toast. Mariner Bay Resort. 3 summers ago. She remembered standing in front of an open industrial oven, her arms dusted with flour, as she listened to the head chef complain about last-minute banquet orders. She'd been tired, hot, and smiling. Now, in a kitchen 10 times larger and 10 times quieter, she felt like a ghost in her own body. Later that day, a knock came at her door. Thomas. He stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, shirt sleeves rolled just once at the cuffs. He looked like someone who had spent the morning solving problems she'd never hear about. "I wanted to check in," he said simply. Claire nodded, not stepping aside. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you." He looked past her, just briefly. "The room was untouched. You haven't unpacked." "I don't need much." Another pause. This one longer. "Do you want to come downstairs?" he asked. "We have guests." "Guests, just a few board members. They expect to meet you." Claire hesitated, not because she feared people, but because she knew exactly what they'd expect. A polished woman with the right smile, the right heels, and just enough charm to look like she belonged. She owned one pair of dress shoes, and they still had a scratch across the front from the last job interview she didn't get. But she nodded anyway. "I'll be down in 10. She chose a soft navy dress, not tight, not loose, modest, the kind of thing you wear to a parent-teacher conference or a library event. She left her hair down, though the ends curled unpredictably in the Charleston humidity. When she entered the parlor, the room quieted. 3 men in tailored suits sat around a leather ottoman, sipping scotch like it was part of their posture. A woman with perfect posture and a tight blazer looked up with mild interest. Claire walked in without flinching. Thomas stood and introduced her simply. "My wife, Claire." The word felt strange again, but she said nothing. "Claire," said one of the men, shaking her hand. "What is it you do?" She answered plainly. "I used to work in hospitality. Logistics. Now I volunteer at a literacy center. No fluff, no embellishments." Someone raised an eyebrow. Another offered a tight smile. No one asked a follow-up. Claire sat beside Thomas. He didn't touch her, but he didn't look away from her either. When the meeting ended and the guests filed out, the woman in the blazer turned back and said softly, "You're quieter than I expected." Claire smiled, just slightly. "I've found that silence makes people show their true selves." The woman didn't respond, just walked away, heels clicking like a clock winding down. That evening, Claire returned to her room. The suitcase was still closed. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her book. Her fingers paused on the first page. There was a line she loved. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" She didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in years, she had a reason to ask the question. The bedroom they were supposed to share looked like something out of a magazine designed for beauty, not comfort. The floors were dark oak, polished to a mirror-like sheen. The fireplace, carved in limestone, sat untouched, the logs perfectly stacked, but never burned. The four-poster bed, high and grand, was made with hospital precision, ivory linens, 6 pillows, not a single crease out of place. Claire stood just inside the doorway. Thomas was already in the room, loosening the knot of his tie. His jacket hung neatly over the back of a chair. He looked tired, though the day had been short by corporate standards. Neither of them said anything for a while. Claire took a step forward. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the bookshelf, built into the wall, filled with novels too pristine to have ever been opened. "This is your room?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "It's the guest master suite." Claire raised an eyebrow. "My real bedroom is down the hall," he added. "Has been for years." She nodded slowly. "So this arrangement, it's not for you either." Thomas gave a small, sardonic smile. "Most of my life hasn't been." That made her pause. Not because it surprised her, but because she understood it more than she wanted to admit. Claire moved toward the window. The drapes were pulled halfway open, and through them, Charleston glowed in the distance. Beyond the trees, the marshlands shimmered silver in the moonlight. She turned back. "Do you want me to stay here?" He looked at her, unsure how to answer. Then he said quietly, "The estate has 17 rooms. Choose whichever feels most like yours." Claire hesitated. "Would it bother you if I stayed?" "No." He replied. "Would it bother you if I left?" She shook her head. "No." And so they made their first decision together, not to decide anything at all. Later that night, after a long bath and a moment of silence at the edge of the bed, Claire changed into a simple cotton nightgown and pulled the book from her suitcase. It was creased at the spine, water-stained, dog-eared in 3 places, of mice and men. She read it every few years, each time getting stuck on the same page. It wasn't the story itself that held her. It was the way it made her feel raw, human, flawed but trying. She sat cross-legged on the bed, reading by the warm light of a bedside lamp. The door creaked slightly. Thomas stood there again. No tie this time. Shirt sleeves folded neatly at the elbows. He didn't come in. "You're reading still?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up, half surprised. "I do that sometimes." "What is it?" She held up the cover. "Oh," he gave a half smile. "Steinbeck. Haven't read him in years. He makes sadness feel necessary," she said. Thomas stepped just inside the room. He didn't sit, didn't ask to. "I don't sleep well," he said. Claire nodded. "Me neither." A long pause. "I didn't expect you to be like this," he admitted. She tilted her head, quiet, unimpressed. "No," he said. "Present." That word landed heavier than it should have, like a truth no one had spoken in a long time. Claire closed the book, placed it gently on the nightstand. "Thomas," she said. He looked up. "This marriage, I know what it is. But I won't be a ghost in this house." "You're not," he said immediately. "Maybe not yet," she whispered. "But it's easy to fade when no one really sees you." She didn't say it with anger, just matter of fact, like someone who had lived it. Thomas took a breath. "I see you." They stood in that strange, sacred silence. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "Good night, Claire." She offered a soft, honest reply. "Good night, Thomas." He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Claire pulled the blanket up to her chest. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and starch, too clean to feel like home. But something in the room had changed. Not the temperature, not the light. The air felt a little less heavy. In his own room, Thomas stood at the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal tumbler of bourbon he hadn't touched. He stared out into the dark. He didn't know why her presence lingered, why her words stuck. But he knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, the silence in his house didn't feel empty. The sun rose slow and gold across the Everhart estate, casting long shadows over the marble floors. Claire didn't sleep in. She never did. By 6:30, she was already dressed in a plain button-down shirt and soft slacks. No one had told her what a billionaire's wife should wear for breakfast, so she chose something she'd once worn as a resort assistant when she needed to feel efficient, invisible, capable. She didn't want to stay in the guest wing. Too quiet, too still. Instead, her feet took her to the only place in the house that felt somewhat familiar, the kitchen. The double doors creaked open to a wave of warmth, not just heat from the ovens, but something else, something older. The smell of baking bread, lemon oil, and brewed coffee floated in the air like an old song. Claire paused on the threshold, letting it settle into her skin. The kitchen looked nothing like the one she used to work in at Mariner Bay. But something about it, the worn chopping boards, the clinking pans, the soft whir of a dishwasher, tugged at something deep inside her. A man stood at the far counter, sleeves rolled, apron spotted with flour. His hair was white at the temples, thick in the middle, and his back slightly stooped from years in the profession. He looked up when she stepped in. "Well, now," he said with a slow smile. "Didn't think I'd see the new Mrs. Everhart in here." Claire smiled. "I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." "You're welcome anywhere there's coffee," he replied, pouring her a cup before she could ask. His name was Walter, head of the kitchen staff for over 20 years. "I remember you," he said after a moment, handing her the mug. "From the resort, Mariner Bay. You were the girl who always stayed late to stack the supply crates." Claire sipped slowly. "I didn't think anyone noticed." Walter gave a low chuckle. "Cooks notice everything, sweetheart. It's our job." They talked quietly as the kitchen came to life around them. Two younger chefs moved in and out, prepping fruit, checking ovens, never interrupting. Claire sat on a wooden stool near the back counter, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic warmth. "I loved the kitchens," she admitted, "more than I should have. I never wanted to run anything, just be where the noise was real." Walter nodded. "You looked like a girl who carried things too big for her age, like you were always listening for something nobody else could hear." Claire blinked. That was a sentence she hadn't been prepared for. "I didn't expect to be here," she whispered. "As a bride, as anyone." Meanwhile, upstairs, Thomas was passing through the west corridor when he glanced out the tall window overlooking the garden path. The kitchen sat at the far end of the courtyard. Through the glass, he caught a glimpse of Claire inside, not just passing through. She was seated, laughing, maybe engaged. He stopped. Something about the image struck him, not jealousy, not even curiosity, recognition. She looked, right there, not posed, not confined, just present. Again. He didn't go downstairs right away. Instead, he walked to the far study and sat in the leather armchair by the fireplace, staring at the unlit logs. An hour later, Claire returned to the main hallway, a small linen-wrapped parcel in her hands. Walter had insisted she take a loaf of the morning bread. For the room, he'd said, in case that fancy pantry doesn't know how to comfort a woman. Claire had laughed. It felt good. She was halfway up the grand staircase when Thomas appeared at the top landing. Their eyes met. "I saw you," he said. Claire lifted the parcel. "Walter makes better bread than I remember." Thomas offered a faint smile. "You looked happy." Claire hesitated, then replied honestly, "For a minute, I forgot I didn't belong." "You do," he said quickly. Then, more softly, "If anyone doesn't, it's me." She took a step up. "You live here. I exist here," he corrected. "That's not the same." Claire stood still for a moment. "Then maybe we should both find the parts of this house that let us feel more than that." She didn't wait for his response. She continued up the stairs, not cold, not dismissive, just grounded. Thomas remained there, watching her go. Back in her room, Claire unwrapped the bread. Still warm. She tore off a piece, dipped it into the olive oil she'd quietly grabbed from the pantry. It was simple, earthy, real. She sat by the window, eating in silence. The sound of early birds outside and the ticking wall clock behind her. This wasn't home. Not yet. But today, for a little while, it hadn't felt like a cage either. And that was something. The invitation list had been short. That was the plan. Thomas disliked showy gatherings, and Claire had no one to invite. The dinner was meant to be a formality, an introduction of Claire to the core board members and a few long-standing family allies. 10 people, polished, predictable. But that night, as the crystal chandelier bathed the dining room in warm amber light, a 12th chair was quietly added. She walked in, as if she belonged. Of course she did. Vivien Marquette always walked that way. Vivien was everything Claire wasn't. Tall, commanding, dressed in a black silk dress that fit like it had been sewn onto her that morning. Her earrings flashed with every subtle tilt of her head, and her hair, the color of burnt honey, coiled in a perfect chignon. Claire noticed the change in the room the moment Vivien stepped in. Not just the surprise, the calculation. Eyes darted toward Thomas. He stiffened, just slightly, the fingers of his left hand tightening around the wine stem. Vivien smiled like a cat near milk. "Thomas," she said airily, "I didn't realize you were accepting visitors again." "Imagine my delight." "Vivien," he said evenly, "I didn't send for you, I know. But Charleston is too small a town, and rumors spread like spilled bourbon." She turned her gaze on Claire. "And when I heard, well, I simply had to see." Claire stood slowly. She was not intimidated. She had served women like Vivien before, in hotels, in restaurants, in silence. She knew the tone. She recognized the weaponized sweetness. "Claire Whitman," she said, offering a hand. Vivien took it, barely. "Oh, I've heard your name," Vivien said with a small laugh, as if the name itself were a delightful accident. Dinner resumed with awkward grace. The long mahogany table stretched between Claire and Thomas like a polite moat. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware scraped, and under it all ran the low hum of money, trying to sound casual. Vivien sat across from Claire, swirling her wine slowly, watching. "So, Claire," she said at last, voice light, "tell us, where did you two meet? It must have been quite the story." Claire glanced at Thomas. He didn't jump in. She looked back at Vivien, eyes calm. "I worked at one of the Everhart resorts. Logistics." Vivien raised an eyebrow. "And now, you're the wife of the CEO. That's quite the promotion." Someone coughed quietly. No one met Claire's eyes. She smiled faintly. It's not so different, actually. Vivien blinked. Pardon. Claire leaned in. Her tone even. In logistics, I kept things running behind the scenes, made things work smoothly, handled unpredictable personalities with a smile, and I was invisible, which made people honest around me. She lifted her wine glass. Very useful skills. Even now. For a moment, the table froze. Then someone laughed. A little too loudly. Vivien's smile didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. After dinner, guests were offered brandy and dessert in the parlor. Claire excused herself. Thomas found her outside, on the back terrace, where the scent of night jasmine floated on the breeze and the cicadas sang soft lullabies. She stood by the railing, arms crossed, hair tousled by the wind. You didn't tell me she was coming, Claire said. I didn't know. He replied. She came to make a point. Yes. Claire looked at him. What was she to you? Thomas took a moment. She was almost my wife. He said. Claire didn't flinch. And now, she wants to see if the new one is made of paper. His jaw tightened. She's not worth your time. Claire shook her head. That's not the point. What is the point? That it's always easy to underestimate someone who didn't arrive in a limousine. She looked away again. I've lived long enough in rooms where no one saw me coming. I just didn't expect to still be invisible as a wife. Thomas stepped closer. I saw you. At that table. She nodded. But did you see me before she asked who I was? That question stayed in the air like smoke. He didn't answer. Inside, Vivien remained in the parlor, sipping her second glass of port. She watched the staff move quietly around her, people in uniforms, hands behind backs, eyes averted. Her world, her rules, until Walter walked by. The old chef met her gaze, not with hostility, but with distance. You remember me? She asked. Walter paused. I remember who noticed the help, he said, and who didn't. Vivien laughed. Always the poetic one. Walter didn't smile. Claire returned to her room early. She didn't cry. She wasn't angry. She sat at the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. There were no diamonds on her fingers, just a simple gold band. It felt heavier than usual. She pulled her book from the nightstand, but didn't open it. She simply held it. Upstairs, Thomas paced the hallway outside his father's old study. He hated conflict, not because he was afraid of it, but because it lingered. It lived in walls. He stopped by the grand piano in the West Gallery. He hadn't touched it in years. He sat. He played one key, then another. A broken chord, like a thought not finished. The storm came in without warning. By dusk, the sky had darkened into a dense charcoal, and wind lashed against the wide windows of the Everhart estate, like restless fingers demanding entry. The coastal air carried the thick scent of sea salt and magnolia, crushed beneath the weight of coming rain. Claire stood in the conservatory, watching the trees sway violently. The glass roof above her trembled with every gust, but she didn't flinch. She had lived through worse storms, the kind that didn't knock loudly, just settled quietly in the bones and stayed for years. A crack of thunder shattered the silence. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. Everything fell into hush. No hum from the refrigerator, no soft click of hallway sconces, just the wind, the creak of wood, and the distant roll of thunder that sounded too close for comfort. Claire waited in the dark, letting her eyes adjust. She didn't panic. Darkness didn't scare her. Being unseen had never been the threat, it was being misunderstood, that stung. She reached for her phone but left it. The moment didn't need distraction. Instead, she walked slowly, barefoot, toward the one place she knew she'd find calm. Thomas was already in the library. The storm had pulled him from sleep, or maybe he hadn't truly been asleep to begin with. Either way, he stood near the large window, backlit only by the occasional lightning strike that lit up the rain-streaked glass. Claire entered quietly. The room smelled of paper and leather, and something older like memory. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. They simply stood together in the semi-dark, like two ghosts remembering they had once been alive. Then Claire moved to the small alcove beneath the window. There was a chair there, and particularly comfortable, but always dry. She sat, tucking her knees close to her chest. Thomas turned to face her, the light behind him casting long shadows across his face. He didn't sit. "I don't remember the last time the house went dark," he murmured. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe it needed to. He looked at her, not just glanced, looked, in a way that people rarely do. "You weren't shaken," he said. "No." "Why?" She tilted her head. "Because the dark has never been the enemy. Not for me." He took a slow step closer. Then, another. Claire didn't move. "I used to think silence meant safety," she said. "As a kid, if I stayed quiet, no one noticed me. And if no one noticed me, they couldn't break me." Thomas sat finally across from her. His voice was almost a whisper. "I used to think control meant safety. If I managed everything, nothing could surprise me." She nodded. "How's that working for you?" He gave a soft laugh, the kind that almost sounded like pain. The storm outside grew louder. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 whispered regrets. Thomas leaned back, his gaze on the ceiling. "My mother used to read to me during storms," he said, "even when I was too old for stories. She said it gave the thunder a rhythm." Claire rested her chin on her knees. What did she read? Anything she loved. Poetry, old cookbooks, letters from her mother. He paused. "One night, she read the stock market reports just to see if I'd fall asleep to numbers." Claire smiled. "Did you know?" I asked her what dividends meant, and ruined the moment. They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that cleared a little air between them. The room fell into quiet again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was safe. Claire stood slowly and walked toward the bookshelves. Her fingers grazed the spines, like old piano keys. She found one without looking. A slim green volume. "Robert Frost," she said, opening the cover. "May I?" Thomas nodded. Her voice, when she read, was low, and even like a lullaby not meant for sleep, but for remembering. "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep." The storm began to ease, as if listening. After a long pause, Claire closed the book. Neither of them moved. Then Thomas spoke. "I wasn't ready for you." Claire turned toward him. "I wasn't sent here to be ready. I came to be real." Another beat. Then she asked quietly, "What did you see in me?" When Charles first brought up my name, he met her gaze. A woman who knew how to survive, without asking anyone to notice. She held his eyes. "And what do you see now?" His voice was steady. "Someone I don't want to forget." Lightning flashed one last time outside, but it felt far now, distant, like a memory that no longer owned them. They sat there, neither speaking, neither needing to. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something had changed, not loudly, but deeply. Claire found the letter by accident. It had slipped between the pages of an old finance book, In the study, one of those thick, dry volumes with gold-trimmed pages and a broken spine. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wandering, as she sometimes did, when the silence in the estate grew too wide. The envelope was unsealed, no address, no date. The ink, though slightly faded, was in a woman's hand, elegant, tight. The loops of each O, like a signature of their own. She didn't mean to read it, but the first line caught her breath like a stone in her throat. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye. It was from Eleanor Everhart, Thomas's mother. Claire sat down in the corner armchair by the tall window, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. She read on. You never needed my approval, Thomas, but I hope you always knew you had it. I watched you build your empire brick by brick, even while carrying the grief of a child who never learned how to cry. That strength frightened me sometimes, how you endured in silence. But it also broke my heart. You were never cold, just scared to be warm again. Claire closed her eyes. The words held too much truth. Not just about Thomas, about herself. That night, Claire returned to her room earlier than usual. She didn't pass by the library. She didn't search for Thomas. She simply sat on the edge of the bed, pulling out her own worn notebook, the one she carried for years, but rarely wrote in. She opened to a blank page, and she wrote, not a letter to Thomas, a letter to herself. Dear Claire, you are not a placeholder. You are not someone's solution. You are not an agreement sealed by ink and signatures. You are not disposable just because you came from nowhere. You are not small, even when the room tells you to shrink. You are not invisible. You walked into a house built for men who never listened and chose to stay soft. You've been quiet, but not broken. You've loved before, lost before, but you are still here, and that is not nothing. This time, don't disappear. She signed it, folded it, placed it under her pillow. Not for anyone else, just to remind herself. Meanwhile, Thomas sat in his father's old office, a place he rarely visited, except out of obligation. The thunderstorm had passed, but the night was heavy with the kind of stillness that demanded reflection. The letter from his mother was open on his desk. He didn't know who had found it, perhaps Charles, maybe even Claire, but he recognized the familiar ache in Eleanor's words. A mother who saw what the world praised in him and still mourned what it missed. He folded the letter slowly. It didn't make him cry, but it made him want to remember who he used to be before success became armor. The next morning, Claire wandered to the south end of the property, a part of the estate that hadn't been renovated, untouched since Thomas's childhood. There, behind a wall of overgrown ivy and flaking paint, she found the rose room. Walter had mentioned it once, casually, in the kitchen. That's where Mrs. Everhart kept her letters. She believed every room should smell like something blooming. Claire pushed open the creaky door. Dust floated in shafts of golden light. And there, in the center of the room, was a worn writing desk, empty vases on the shelves, dried petals scattered across the floor like forgotten thoughts. She sat at the desk and breathed. Thomas found her there 30 minutes later. He didn't speak when he saw her, just stood at the doorway, watching the way sunlight framed her hair, how her hands rested gently on the old oak. You found her room, he said softly. Claire nodded. She wrote beautifully. Thomas entered, his steps quiet. She wrote when she couldn't say things out loud. My father never read any of her letters. Claire looked up. Did you know until last night? She studied him. Did they help? He gave a long breath. They made me wish I had known her better. Before I learned how to bury things, Claire stood, walked toward him. She didn't reach for his hand, just stood close. "You're not the only one who buried parts of themselves," she said. "We all hide what we think no one wants to carry." Thomas met her gaze. "I want to carry something," he said. "I just don't know how." Claire nodded. "Then let's both start with this." She pulled a folded note from her pocket, her letter to herself, and placed it on the desk. Not for him. But she didn't hide it either. He looked at it. He didn't read it, but he understood what it meant. That night, Claire didn't return to her guest suite. She stood in the hallway outside Thomas's room. When he opened the door, he didn't look surprised. She didn't ask to come in. She just said, "I can't promise forever." He replied, "I'm not asking for that. Just tonight. Just real." And that was enough. It started with a headline. Nothing explosive, just sharp enough to pierce. From kitchen to castle, who is Claire Whitman, the unknown bride of billionaire Thomas Everhart by noon? It was everywhere: tabloids, social blogs, financial gossip sites. The photos were grainy, stolen from a long lens at the estate gates. One even showed Claire walking barefoot on the south lawn, holding a book. The caption called her ethereal. Another called her convenient. Claire read it once, then closed the screen. She didn't cry. She just sat there, very still, very awake. In the dining hall, Thomas stood with Charles, his lawyer, a printed copy of the article clenched in his hand. "This is a breach," Thomas said tightly. "We kept everything private. I had the guest list vetted. The press was blocked." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Your PR team thinks someone from the dinner leaked it. Probably someone who didn't like the new arrangement." Thomas's jaw locked. "Vivien." Charles didn't reply. He didn't need to. That evening, Claire didn't come down for dinner. Thomas found her in the rose room, standing by the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "You saw it," she said, not turning. "I did. You didn't tell me. I was handling it." Claire turned then, her expression unreadable. "Handling it? Like I'm a press problem. A misstep." "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." He exhaled sharply. "Claire, I've spent my entire life keeping my name out of scandal. I built everything from the ground up. I had no father to lean on, no second chances, and I've spent my entire life cleaning up messes I didn't make." She snapped. It was the first time she raised her voice. The echo startled them both. She took a step back, gathering herself. "I've swallowed enough shame to feed a city. Thomas, I've been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed in rooms smaller than this, and colder than this." Her voice broke slightly. "But I never thought I'd feel that again. Not here. Not with you." His mouth opened, but no words came. She stared at him. "You said you saw me." "I do." She shook her head. "You see me when I'm quiet, when I stay in my corner, when I don't make noise. That's not true, isn't it?" She left the room, quiet, controlled. But her heart thundered in her chest. Upstairs, in her suite, Claire packed slowly. She didn't need much. She had never arrived with much. A few clothes, the book, the letter. She left the wedding ring on the desk, inside the cover of Mice and Men. Thomas found the room empty. Just before midnight, he saw the ring first, then the book. He didn't need a note. He knew. She hadn't run out of fear. She'd walked away to protect something he'd almost destroyed her dignity. Walter found him in the morning, standing in the kitchen doorway, unmoving. "She's gone," Thomas said flatly. Walter nodded. "I know. She didn't say goodbye. Sometimes, saying goodbye makes it harder to stay gone." Thomas ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean to push her away." Walter's gaze was steady. "No, but you didn't give her enough reason to stay either." That afternoon, Thomas entered the estate's old chapel. It hadn't been used in years, not since Eleanor's memorial service. Dust coated the pews, light filtered through stained glass, in fractured reds and golds. He sat alone in the front row, holding nothing, thinking of everything. He thought of Claire at the kitchen counter, Claire on the lawn, Claire laughing quietly with Walter, Claire reading Frost during the storm. She had never asked for more, only for honesty, respect, a place to belong, and he, in all his wealth and calculation, had made her feel like a liability. That night, the estate felt quieter than usual, not empty, just missing something, the kind of silence that echoes and lingers. The chapel was silent. Dust settled gently over the wooden pews, catching the late morning light, like forgotten snow. The altar, untouched for years, bore only a single white rose Claire's doing. Maybe, or perhaps Eleanor's memory had made it grow there all the same. Thomas sat in the front row, holding a letter, not from Claire, but the one she'd written to herself, the one she'd left behind in the rose room, half folded, just visible enough for him to find. He had not read it the first time, but now he did. Every word, and when he reached the end, he didn't feel shame. He felt seen and unworthy. Claire hadn't gone far. Thomas knew that before Charles confirmed it. She hadn't booked a flight. She hadn't returned to the city. She hadn't even withdrawn the remainder of the monthly fund he'd transferred for her expenses. "She's still in Charleston," Charles said. "But she doesn't want to be found." Thomas shook his head. She never wanted to be chased. She just wanted to be chosen. 3 days passed. On the 4th, Thomas returned to the places she had touched, not to look for her, but to feel what he had missed. The kitchen. Walter was rolling out dough, arms powdered with flour. "She asked me once if this house had ever felt like home," the old chef said. Thomas leaned on the doorway. "What did you say?" I told her. "Home isn't built by architecture. It's built by the people who refuse to disappear." The conservatory still held her book on the bench, pressed open to a page in Of Mice and Men. The passage underlined read, "Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other." Thomas sat beside it for a long while. On the 5th day, he drove himself to Mariner Bay Resort, the property where Claire once worked. He asked for the head of operations. She remembered Claire well. She ran the logistics side like it was her calling. The woman said, "Always last to leave." She knew how to solve a problem before anyone else realized there was one. Did she ever talk about her life? Only once, the manager said. Thoughtful. She said she liked working behind the scenes because it was easier to care for others when no one expected you to shine. Thomas nodded, then asked where would she go. If she needed to breathe, it was Walter who gave him the answer that evening. "There's a community center near the harbor." She mentioned it once, said she used to volunteer there, teach reading classes, said it was the only place she didn't feel small. He found her there the next morning, in a small room with chipped linoleum floors and sunlight pouring through uneven blinds. She sat on a folding chair, helping an elderly man sound out the word gratitude. She didn't notice Thomas until the session ended. When she looked up, she didn't speak, but she didn't walk away either. He approached slowly. No pretense, no defense. He carried nothing with him. No papers, no rings, no plans. Just himself. And a voice that trembled when he finally said, "I came without a contract this time." Claire studied him. The same man, but something had changed in his eyes. Less guarded, more real. "You found the letter," she said softly. "I did. And I think you wrote what I've never dared say to myself." He paused. "Claire, I won't try to fix you, and I won't ask you to fix me. But I will show up every day and earn the right to be beside you." A tear slid down her cheek, silent and certain. He stepped closer. No grand wedding," he said. "No guests, no headlines, just you, me, and words that actually mean something." Claire nodded. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Then say them." He reached into his coat pocket, not for a ring, but a scrap of paper. Handwritten, a vow, not legal, not required, just true. "I vow to listen before I lead, to see you even when the world doesn't, to choose you not because I have to, but because I want to, every single time." Claire took his hand, spoke her own words. "I vow to remain soft in a hard world, to speak even when silence feels safer, to stay, not for comfort, but because love deserves a home." They didn't kiss, like in the movies. They simply held each other, like people who had finally arrived. It wasn't in a church. It wasn't in a ballroom. There were no chandeliers, no gold-edged invitations, no designer gowns, just the soft hush of the ocean, and two folding chairs on the dock behind the Mariner Bay Resort, where Claire had once rolled linen carts before sunrise and counted wine glasses before galas. This time, she wasn't counting anything. She was simply present. Thomas wore no tie, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled, top button undone. Claire's dress was ivory again, but not the starched kind. The fabric moved when she breathed, like it had waited years to exhale. Walter was there, holding a small bouquet he insisted she carry, though she claimed she didn't want one. "Something alive," he'd said, "just like this new chapter." The only other guest was a woman named Margot Clares, former literacy student from the community center, who cried 3 times before the vows even started. And the efficient man, who once did landscaping for the Everhart estate and had quietly gotten ordained online when his daughter wanted a backyard ceremony. "This one's a little more waterfront than backyard," he said with a grin. Claire laughed. Thomas smiled. The sun slid slowly toward the horizon. They didn't write new vows. They didn't need to. They spoke the same ones they'd whispered days earlier in the quiet of that echoing classroom, where only 2 hearts had been listening. But now, they said them with others present, not because they needed witnesses, but because they no longer needed to hide. Claire's voice was steady this time. "I vow to remain soft in a hard world, to speak even when silence feels safer, to stay, not for comfort, but because love deserves a home." Thomas followed without hesitation. "I vow to listen before I lead, to see you even when the world doesn't, to choose you not because I have to, but because I want to, every single time." They kissed at the end. Not rushed, not posed, just honest. 2 people choosing each other, not out of need, but out of knowing. That night, they walked barefoot along the shore, fingers interlaced. The world behind them felt quieter, not gone, but manageable. Claire leaned her head against Thomas's shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "we were never really strangers, just 2 people waiting to be ready." Thomas turned his face slightly, resting his chin on her hair. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. "Only that I waited so long to write to myself." He nodded. "I'm glad you didn't send it." "Why?" "Because now I get to remind you every day." The waves whispered at their feet. Above them, the stars arrived one by one, and somewhere in the soft dark of the universe, two once broken hearts finally stopped running, not toward each other, but with each other. The Everhart estate felt different now. There was music in the mornings, coffee brewing before sunrise, letters left in the kitchen notes between Claire and Walter about the best pie crust, or reminders to repot the rosemary bush. Thomas walked the garden paths barefoot sometimes. He laughed more. Claire taught a weekly reading class in the converted greenhouse once a month. They hosted open dinners, no guests lists, no press, just people, neighbors, friends, staff, strangers who became less strange with each shared plate of food. One evening, a young server asked Claire, "Is it true you used to work here before you married Mr. Everhart?" Claire smiled gently. "No," she said, "I didn't marry Mr. Everhart." The girl blinked. "You didn't." Claire leaned closer. "I married Thomas. As we journey through life, many of us learn to survive by staying quiet, by compromising, by settling into roles that keep the peace even when they leave our hearts behind. Claire and Thomas's story reminds us of something we often forget. Being chosen is not the same as being needed, and love that is based on convenience, obligation, or silence will never fill the space where true connection should live. This is a story not about wealth, but about worth, the kind that isn't defined by status, but by presence, by respect, by honesty. At any age, we can still choose to speak up, to walk away from what diminishes us, to stay only in the spaces where we are truly seen. Because it's never too late to rewrite your vows, not the ones you said at the altar, but the quiet promises you make to yourself to be whole, to be real, to be loved, without conditions. In a world that often praises strength through silence, this story gently reminds us it takes even more courage to stay soft and to stay true. Thank you for spending these quiet moments with us. If this story touched something in you, even just a little, we invite you to share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt journeys. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, stay kind and stay true.